This is Bill Kennedy with the Ardan Labs podcast, and my special guest today comes all the way from San Francisco, Vanesa Ortiz. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Brilliant. Okay, so to be fair, I've known Vanessa for a little bit, right? I mean, known each other very well, but I remember after you moved from Berlin, coming to San Francisco and getting involved with some people in the Go community, which is brilliant. So I want to explore all of that with you because even though we've met before and we've talked, I've never really gotten your full story. And so I think this is going to be great. But before we go back in time, why don't you give everybody 2 minutes where you are today and kind of what you're doing?
So today I am a community advocate at Sourcegraph. I've been at Sourcecraft for the past 3.5 years, more or less. And I'm loving it there.
I love the founders over there. I love the company. I do love the product. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about what Sourcecraft is doing and kind of like your role is in helping promote that?
Yeah. So Sourcegraph is a dev tool that helps with code search and code intelligence. We're basically the universal code search, the only universal code search solution out there, really. And if you are struggling with finding, the code that you need to find and the abundance of codes that exist nowadays, especially now with the big code challenges that we face nowadays, and you need a product like Sourcegraph to help you out. We have been around for a while. People are starting to appreciate and use us more. It's also an amazing tool that helps with remote work, as it makes the developer much more independent. They can find solutions to their questions. They can really dive deep into the code and understand things much faster with tools like find final references, go to definition. You will have those kinds of abilities on across repositories, across code hosts as well. So you really have no limitations whatsoever to find your code, to understand your code much faster. And yeah, that's what Sourcecraft does. It's basically a superpower for developers.
I love the GitHub integration. If you put the Sourcegraph plugin in your Chrome browser and then you start navigating GitHub, that alone is worth the price of admission. I'm very comfortable with Go, so I tend not to need a lot more tooling than what I'm kind of getting, because Go is such a tools-oriented programming language. But I remember one day I had to start looking at some JavaScript Node code. And I was pulling my hair out. And then I was like, Sourcegraph, what am I doing? And boom, I started to be able to navigate all of the code inside of GitHub in this repository. And I was just like, okay, I get it. Here we are. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's the thing. We integrate with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, like really all the main code hosts out there. And people love us for that, because suddenly you have things that you would normally only have locally through your IDE, but now you can use them from your browser, really, and then have all these abilities to make your life much easier.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So we have the browser extension for that. We have, of course, then the local installation that if you want. We're on-prem. We're also going on the cloud soon. And yeah, there's a lot of exciting things coming our way.
Nice. Okay, so within the scope of the next hour, we're going to get to how you end up at Sourcegraph. But I want to ask you some questions that are going to happen a little bit earlier, and I may ask you for maybe how old you were, or we'll get some dates, just so to give people perspective on where we're talking, okay? So one of my most favorite questions, and then if you listen to the podcast, you hear me always kind of ask this first, is give me your kind of first memory of working on a computer and having one of those kind of like aha moments, or that you did something and it was just super exciting. Like what's the first memory that pops in your head?
I think the first memory I would have, I think I must have been 5 years old. And my dad took me to his work. He was an engineer, and he took me to his office. I don't know what the situation was, if we didn't have childcare or something happened, and he had to take me with him to the office. And since he had to work and couldn't actually take care of me, he just sat me in front of his computer. This is like, I don't think it was even Windows. Maybe it was Windows. It must have been one of the super early versions of Windows. I remember these like very big discs. And it had Paint. So he sat me in front of the computer and he opened Paint for me, and he showed me how to draw on the computer, and that's how I spent the entire afternoon, just like drawing with the mouse, trying to figure out the connection between mouse and display, and seeing that I could use all these different tools to draw. And I think that's what really sparked my curiosity for computers.
So he basically was able to get a babysitter for hours because you were so consumed with it. Did he give you any? I mean, you're 5 years old. I can't remember. The only thing I can remember when I was 5 was I drank some spoiled milk in kindergarten. Never drank milk again. But that's for a different day. Did he give you any sort of quick tutorial there, or you just you think you just sat there?
He must have. I mean, he probably just sat me there and just like showed me, okay, this is a mouse, this is a computer, you move the mouse, this little thing moves, and if you click on this and then maintain this clicked and drag it along, you'll make a line, and things like that. And I think that's just how he taught it.
Wow. Okay, so
And
your father.
I must have gotten it and just started painting.
So your father is an engineer. What kind of engineering did he do?
He's a civil engineer, so back then he was building buildings.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So that's your first kind of memory there. So let's get to a little bit later than that. Um, did you have a computer at home at that point? Were you using the computer
No,
at all when you were? No, no, no. So
no. And this is, and just for context, this was in the Dominican Republic. I was living in the Dominican Republic. Having a computer at home was very uncommon. At least this is, back in the 1990s, early 1990s. At least for Dominicans, it would have been very unusual to have a computer at home. People had them at work. And I imagine, of course, engineering offices were a little bit more advanced than in other work fields. Yeah, so I didn't have a computer at home until I was probably 10 years old.
10. So another 5 years later, which kind of puts you now in a middle school. Well, no, I guess you're still in elementary school at that point. But
No, I was in 5th grade or 6th grade even.
so by the time you're 10, now there's a computer in the house. Okay, so
And I've also changed locations. I've
mm,
also changed locations, which is important for the storyline as well. When I'm 10 years old, I'm now living in Germany.
okay. So wow, you
Yeah.
remember that. That's a huge change, right? You're going from the Dominican Republic to Germany. Um, Give me some thoughts on what's going in your head at 10 years old because you're leaving friends, you're leaving something very familiar. Were you excited? Were you
hmm
not excited? Was this what's going on in your head? Do you remember?
I mean, of course, it was a huge culture shock. Dominican Republic and Germany are just so different to each other. Um, I mean, weather, culture, language, everything was new. Um, so it was definitely exciting times. The computer that we had at our house was actually a very old hand me down from our neighbor. Sorry, somehow my Siri turned on. Let me turn that off. So yeah, it was a very old hand me down from our neighbor, and of course my parents put the computer in my brother's room because computers are for boys, not for girls, and they thought that yeah, that he was the one who needed to have the computer in his room. My brother's younger than me, 3 years younger, so I was not happy about this. And of course, whenever I wanted to use a computer, he wanted to play games, and it was always a fight on who got to use the computer.
So all of that's kind of interesting, right? Because I guess initially in the Dominican Republic, you're speaking Spanish. You're not speaking English.
I mean, English is not the language you speak in the Dominican Republic, but it is relatively common because of the tourism. And I was privileged enough to go to an American school. My parents really wanted to invest in our education, so I was really, really lucky that I got to go to an American school, which then facilitated later when we moved to Germany to learn German, because I find that the difference between English and German is not as big as Spanish to German. So when I was learning German, I actually had an American accent, which was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. All right, so the computer is in your brother's room. He's using it to
Yes.
play games. What are you using it for?
I was using it for the internet. Like for me, the internet was discovering that the internet existed and I could like access any kind of information I wanted was the best. I really love that. I was a avid user of back then, Yahoo and Hasta La Vista. Like this was before Google was a major thing, or at least I think it might have already existed. I'm not sure, but it just wasn't as common. And I just love that. I had an account at Fortune City, so I had a little profile page as well. And I actually continued painting, not, I mean, yes, on Microsoft Paint, but also I upgraded to Photo Impact and then to one of the first versions of Adobe Photoshop, Adobe. Yeah, and I really enjoy like designing, I don't know. Actually, I started just doing these paintings or just like images of, I don't know, things that 11-year-olds draw, dolphins in front of sunsets and things like that. And I was so proud of my work that I wanted to publish it and show it to the world. So I built this Fortune City click and drag website. Actually, it wasn't that. I don't remember. It was very easy to do it. And I uploaded those images. And I actually had people email me and talk to me and ask me if I could design their, I don't know, rowing club logo or things like that.
And
So
this is at
yeah,
11 years old. So you're
yeah,
leveraging the computer in a very creative way, and you're creating art. You're building websites.
yeah.
You're out there. How are you talking to these people? Because
Email.
over email, are your
Yeah.
parents monitoring any of that?
No, I was very lucky. Yeah, I was very lucky that I think back then it was not as common, I would say, as today with like predators and who knows who could have taken advantage of that. No, it was very a very innocent internet world back then. Um,
But you had an email address. Who set up your email address? Who set all that up?
my neighbor, no, my neighbor helped me set up my Bigfoot email address. It was a Bigfoot email address back then. Yeah, and I think one of the things that got me even more into like using the computer was that because I had this page on Fortune City, there was this little counter on how many people visited the website, and I was so frustrated that that number was extremely low, of course. Um, and I thought about something happened in Germany. This is, I think I was 12 years old, so it must have been 1997 or 1998. I'd have to look it up. But there was a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse in Germany. And there were a lot of people, like it was in the media, everyone was excited about it. And I had this idea of like, what can I do to bring a lot of people to my Fortune City website? And I had this idea of creating a list of links for webcams who would live stream the solar eclipse because not everyone could experience it, especially people outside of Germany. So I created this really cool and long list of a ton of webcams that would be filming the solar eclipse. And on the day of the solar eclipse, I had 2,000 viewers on my Fortune City website, and it was great. Like I was so proud, and it was like the best experience ever. And what I did was actually SEO without knowing that it was SEO, right? Um,
It's more than that. It's more than that. It's more than SEO. What you were doing, like you were building a brand. You were building a presence. You were building relevance. right?
Yeah,
All under the
I
idea
guess.
that you wanted people.
To share my paint pictures.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because you were learning skills already at 12
Hmm.
that I have to imagine are still applying today as we get there. And this is 12 years
Yeah.
old. So,
But then
yeah, go
people
on.
started messaging me more about my images, and by that time I had gotten a little better. I was using better programs with Adobe and Photo Impact, and that's when I started getting even more requests for logo designs, also of internet groups. um, and yeah, that's kind of how I got more into the scene of developing.
But are you getting paid for any of this work? Or are you doing it for free?
Yes, that's when I started. No, that's when I started charging for those graphics, and because I started charging, funnily, people took me as more professional, and then they started also asking for websites, and that's what got me into HTML, which back then it was really just HTML. I'm not sure if CSS even existed or it was really at the early stages. But I started then learning how to build websites because I was getting those requests from potential clients.
Okay, time out, time out, time out, time out. You're like 12, 13 years old in Germany. At this
Yes.
point, your parents don't really know what you're doing. So, how do you say, Dad, I got a job and I'm gonna get paid? Like, at
I
some
don't
point, you
think
got to
that.
go ask your parents, like, what's going, like, no?
No, they didn't really understand what was going on. Like, my parents are zero technical at all. They just thought a computer is like a toy, like a game. They never used it themselves. They didn't understand the internet. Yeah, that this was that they just thought I was playing a game or something like that.
But how are you getting paid?
Well, my neighbor is very technical. My neighbor is very technical, and he was like seeing this development. So he was the one who was supplying me, for example, with the design programs. He was the one who was giving me Photo Impact and Adobe. And when he saw that I got really interested in building websites, he got me Macromedia, Dreamweaver, and things like that. He was supplying me with all the programs. He couldn't really teach me how to do these things because he himself didn't design or build websites, but he could supply me with the programs. Like, he knew how to get those programs very legally. Totally.
And he helped you. So then, as you're charging and making money, I got so many questions here.
I honestly, I don't remember. I think back then, because I didn't even have a bank account or anything like that, I
Right.
think we might have done it in a way that, okay, you transfer the money to him, to my neighbor, and then I get it from him, something like that. It also wasn't like
And your parents don't know.
they probably knew. I mean, they kind of thought that, I don't know, they kind of knew that I was doing something on the computer that was making money, but it wasn't a lot of money. We're talking, like, I was very cheap. I was a child. I was asking for, I don't know, $100 for 5 logos or something like that, or 5 banners, advertising banners and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's not cheap. Especially,
Oh,
I don't know.
okay.
I don't think that's cheap. That's real money. I mean, you have no like. This is super interesting. Okay, but we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on. Okay, so
Okay, okay.
you've kind of have a business going thanks to you. What did your neighbor do? Do you know what your neighbor did for a living? That and I mean, so he's really mentoring you, right?
He's a doctor. he's
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, so he was technical in the sense that he used his computer every day and to put in the information for his patients and all that. Yeah. And
wow.
he actually knew how to use the internet and all these things.
So wow. So he was really mentoring you towards kind of
Mhm.
these things that you found a lot of interest in, and
Yeah.
already at 13, you're a professional web designer, logo design. You're getting paid. You're a professional. Here we go. So so now I get interesting. So let's say now you're getting into kind of high school or that whatever that is in Germany, right? From like say
Yep.
13 to 17 or whatever that is. Um, what I'm really curious about now is you moving into the high school years. Where are you spending your time? Are you doing things like sports or music or other things, or is all your time kind of dedicated
Yeah.
to what you're doing here with
Yeah,
this computer?
I was part of the swim team. I was playing the piano as well. So I did have other activities other than this, but I didn't. I do know that I wasn't spending so much time with friends because I don't know if I was an introvert or it was just that I didn't get along that well with the kids in my class, in a sense that I thought what they were doing was boring. Like at that age, like 15, 16, they were just meeting up in parks, drinking, smoking, talking about stupid things. And that was just not interesting for me at all. I thought it was a waste of time. And instead, I would spend actually a lot of time in the computer and, learn HTML, learn CSS, started to learn JavaScript. And I was just more, I saw so much potential in computing, and I just thought those other things that the teenagers were doing was just not interesting for me. So I was definitely more of the isolated type of kid. And my parents noticed that, and they were a little worried, but they were like, well, as long as she stays out of trouble, it's okay.
But you're growing a business at that point, even when you're 16 and 17. I'm imagining your
Yeah.
business is still growing. You're doing more work.
Yeah, at that point I'm definitely earning more money as well. So but it was so my mom was really happy in a sense that she brought me up in an interesting way that is very un-Dominican. She told me since I was, middle school that the moment I graduated from high school, I would leave home. That I would be on my own financially, and I'd have to, like, the day of my graduation, there would be a suitcase in front of the door and I would have to leave. So
Whoa.
she was happy that I was finding, something that would keep me afloat once I move out of my home. And she was like, that this is very un-Dominican. No Dominican mom would say that. No normal Dominican mom would say that. Everyone wants to keep their kids as close as possible to them. But my mom was just, she had this idea of, she wanted to bring up very independent children that could fend for themselves, and that's how she brought us up. And she kept her word. Like the moment I graduated, I had to move out of the house.
But that had to be a tremendous amount of stress and burden on you.
I mean, she started preparing me for it young, in a sense that she told me from the beginning, like, and she would remind me over and over again, like, that when you finish high school, you're on your own, so like start making a plan. So I feel like probably subconsciously I was just like working towards that goal of being able to sustain myself.
Okay, so luckily, as you are graduating high school, you're generating income. I don't know how, do you feel
It
like you're
wasn't enough
making
to
enough?
survive off.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't really enough to survive. So I had, at that point when I graduated, once I graduated, I moved out, and moved into a teeny tiny apartment. I remember, in the worst neighborhood of Cologne, and but it was very cheap rent, so it was great. Uh, and I had a ton of jobs. In the morning, I would refill printer cartridges, because back then there were like little stations in the city. It was a thing where you would bring in your empty printer cartridge, and then there was someone with like a syringe and would refill the colors. And I was one of those people. And then in the afternoon, I work at a pizza place as a telephone receptionist, and at night I would babysit. So that's kind of what I did until, because I knew I wanted to study, but before starting with university, I wanted to travel. So I was doing all these odd jobs to save up money, and I wanted to go to Costa Rica for 2 months. That was my goal.
Okay, I want to interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
During this time where you're working 3 jobs a day and you're living in this tiny apartment and you're kind of on your own, did you ever feel any, forget about now, back then, did you feel any
Yeah.
animosity against maybe your mom putting you in this situation? Like, did you feel like this
No.
was a burden and I can't believe I have to do this? Or was this more of a challenge? And yeah, what was your mindset back then? No
It wasn't
problem.
a
No good.
burden. It for me, it seemed like it was normal, because she had told me that she had done something similar. Like back then, when she was young, she wanted to go to university, and her parents were against it because it was in a different city. And back then, a young woman cannot live alone. So she like left home and went to university and had to fend for herself too. So I knew it was possible. Like if my mom can do it, I can do it. And I felt like I was really well prepared for it. I'd only always been a pretty independent, and I had discovered this additional income. Like even though I had those three jobs, I also was still doing web design and websites on the side. And actually, at working at this printer cartridge store, I met a lot of people who had to print flyers and things like that who needed design. So I would talk them up and be like, "Hey, don't you need a new design for this and that?" And I would actually start sourcing clients from the printer cartridge shop. So it
Wow.
worked out.
So you had almost no free time, honestly, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you were, which can keep you out of trouble, and you're making money.
Yeah.
And your goal right now is university, but your first goal is to be able to travel to Costa Rica. Why
So at
Costa Rica, and how long does it take for you to get there?
it didn't take long. I had looked at the university in my city, University of Cologne, and I had actually looked at the CS program, and I didn't like it. It was very old fashioned. It had like Delphi in the curriculum and just very, very old stuff. None of the things that I had been teaching myself. So I was too disappointed with the curriculum and decided, okay, this is not for me. I'm going to go for my other passion, which was political science, languages, and I found this study called Latin American Studies that encompassed political science and sociology and languages. So I went for that. But I decided that before I study Latin American studies, I want to get to know another Latin American country, since I only knew the Dominican Republic. And that's why I chose Costa Rica, because it felt like it felt like a safe country to travel to alone, because I was going to head there on my own without knowing anyone. And I really wanted to work at a national park, because the area where I had grown up in the Dominican Republic was very jungly, very jungle-like.
So, Vanessa, up till this point of the story, um, you are programming and designing, and you're doing these things from a very early age. You're also doing a bunch of odd jobs, which ends up helping to support this tech business that you have. And then suddenly I hear you say, well, my other passion is, or is it political science? And where is that coming from? Because I haven't heard one thing from you yet about that side of your passion. So where is that coming from? And I find it super interesting that because you didn't like the curriculum in your local town for the you you immediately say, no, I'm not going to study that. I'm going to study something which seems to me right now completely foreign to everything you're doing. I need to understand that.
I think it's like, in hindsight, I should have probably checked with other cities, and maybe their curriculum would have been much more up to date or better. Especially like cities like Karlsruhe in the south of Germany, where with the KIT University, they're much more up to date in their curriculum and are much more renowned. But I think the problem was the day that I went to visit the university. It was like an open door at the university that would allow high school students to get to know all the different majors and so on. I happened to go to one of the presentations for Latin American studies, and I liked it so much that I just thought, like, you know what, maybe CS is just not the right way, and I can just keep teaching myself, because I had been successful, enough to earn money. Until that point, that I thought, like, well, maybe I can just have a different student experience, but continue working in IT on the side, and just do both, basically. And that's kind of what happened.
I can see you saying, look, I haven't needed formal study. I'm getting paid for this. So this is my opportunity to
Yeah.
maybe learn and do something else, because I'm going to have this anyway. But what was so attractive to you on the Latin studies? What did you think was the end game of that?
I was thinking I was going to end up working for the UN. That was kind of the end goal. Because I had during my high school years specifically, I had read a lot of Noam Chomsky. I was really into history in general. I had definitely dedicated also some time to just educating myself on political science and all kinds of social movements, and I was passionate about languages. Like at that point, I speak 4 languages, so I thought it would be a good combination, and I really liked what the UN had been doing for decades, and thought, yeah, maybe I should join them.
Okay, so you go to Costa Rica. You do this Latin studies over there while you're over there as well.
No, no, no. I was just in the middle of the rainforest, like working as a park ranger in Costa Rica, and I also worked at a little refugee camp. I was really just volunteering and just taking in the Costa Rican culture and learning along the way. But then when I came back from Costa Rica, I started my formal Latin American studies.
Gotcha. How long were you over there doing that? You were there for like 3 months?
2 months, 2 months, yeah.
2 months. Okay, so you do that for 2 months, which could be a whole nother podcast because I got a million questions there. But you
It
come
was
back,
fun.
you come back, and now you start your Latin. So you're still working those jobs,
No, no, no. At that
working your computer
point,
jobs. No?
so the beauty of Germany is that it's very, very supportive to its students. So as soon as I started with university, I was eligible for financial support from the government to study, so that I could I got rid of all my odd jobs, and I was really only being a student and doing the web design work. So I was still a web development
Wow.
web designer, but I would get enough support from the German government to pay for my rent, for example.
Okay. And I have to imagine that technology is moving fast at that point too. So you're also having to keep up with the latest in HTML, CSS, maybe like ASP, server side script. Like you're doing all of that, right? Like you're trying to keep up with that while you're getting your degree.
Yeah, so that was really it was like leading a double life, because on the one hand I have these clients and customers who are definitely demanding more things. I had to get into e-commerce, for example. I was working with a lot of smaller businesses who couldn't afford a proper agency and had then the benefit of using me, who was much, much cheaper, unfortunately, but could do design and development at the same time. So I had those kinds of clients, but they also had increasing needs of not just a pretty website, but also now integrated with e-commerce and have that somehow functioning. And they would always come with these requests and be like, "Oh, can you, can we do an online shop?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I know how to do an online shop. Of course, yeah, we can do that." And then be like looking up all the tutorials I could find online, and just learn on the go. But it was fun. It was great. I love that
I
challenge.
don't know. I'm exhausted trying to think about how you're doing, even if you had just 2 or 3 clients with that kind of level of demand and your studies. I'm exhausted already just hearing all this. So it's amazing.
I can't claim I was the fastest student. It did take me. How long did I study? 5 years to do a. That kind of study doesn't exist anymore, so it wasn't a bachelor, but it was a kind of combination of a bachelor and a master. That back then in Germany we called it a diplom. So I'm like at the level of a master student, and that did take me. Wait, when did I start? Yeah, I mean it took me 6 years to do that. I could have done it faster.
Are you developing any sort of friendships in these 5 years, or are you
Yeah, of
still
course.
kind of isolating yourself between, like,
No.
you're starting to have a social life in between all this too, right? I mean,
Yeah, finally, like the people I met at university was so different to the high school people. It was like those are finally my people. I was really blooming in that environment. I didn't meet anyone I could talk to about, you know, web development at all. Like it's such a Latin American studies student are very non-technical more in a way. I formatted so many resumes. So it was a very different world in that aspect, but they were just amazing people, very, global citizens. I got to travel a ton during my studies. That's also why I do not regret whatsoever studying Latin American studies. My life as a Latin American studies student is so different to that of a CS degree student. I traveled to, I don't know, probably like 30 different countries just during my studies. Got to go to all kinds of conferences. I did a study abroad in San Diego, but also at the same time one in Tijuana, Mexico, because I really wanted to study the border. I did a South America backpacking trip for 9 weeks. I went to China to do a lot of things.
What are your clients doing without you while you're traveling?
What do you mean without me? We have internet connection and I can just communicate with them through email. I was working remote.
Oh, wow. So that's okay. So none of that tech work really gets disturbed while you're traveling and going through China and going through. Like you're doing remote work before anybody. Like you should have written a book on how to handle remote work before everybody was really talking about it. Like think about the experience.
Maybe.
You were ahead of everybody's time.
Yeah, but
you were?
I guess if you look at it that way. It was a very interesting, I don't know why my Siri keeps popping up. It was a very interesting experience for sure. And I tried to make it work. I wanted to do I wanted to have all these experiences of traveling. And at the same time, I needed the additional income to just sustain myself and be able to afford all that. So I made it work.
Wow. Okay. So you graduate with the goal of wanting to work at the UN. Does that happen?
Well, fun fact, no, because the last year when I was still a university student and working towards my thesis, I had the opportunity to work as an overseas researcher for the Lund School of Economics and for Stanford. It was like a collaborative project. And I got to do some research in South America, in Argentina and Chile, regarding labor rights and women's rights and indigenous rights. And there I had the chance to work with people who worked at the UN, and also with activists and a lot of interesting people. And it gave me a really good insight on how my life and my work would be as a UN employee. And while I loved the research and the people I met throughout the project, I realized that I didn't want to put myself in a situation where the organization I was working with would determine where I live and what projects I work with. And I also realized that the whole UN work was too slow-paced for me. So I did this research, I gave in my research papers, and I realized nothing happened. I was expecting, policies to come out of this that would help with indigenous rights, but it just ended up not happening. And I realized that it's such a complicated mechanism where so many different parts have to work for things to move on, and it happens at a very slow pace, that I would not be happy with that, especially having that contrast life of working with small businesses who demanded websites and e-commerce pages that were, built in 2 months or a month, and suddenly they would see instant results of increasing revenue, or it would even save their businesses and so on. So I could see that immediate gratification that I did not get from the UN work at all.
The impact, you were having impact that you could visibly see and be appreciated for, and you weren't going to get that. It was going to be quite the opposite. It sounds like.
Yeah, it was going to be a much more frustrating life, and I realized I didn't have the personality for that. It had to be someone who's more patient and dedicated, very long-term thinking, who can really endure the difficulty that comes with working for the UN, which is very important work, but it just takes a long time. And I found out I wasn't patient. Okay.
So what's going on now then? You come back to Germany, you've graduated. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of the UN is no longer really viable.
Yeah.
You've been making money since you're 13, building websites and helping clients with their technical needs on the internet. So do I guess to say you decide that you're going to go heads down in your tech business? That's it?
Yep. Yep, I moved to Berlin. I think that made a huge impact. So I was living in Cologne at that point, and then I moved over to Berlin, which was even then already the startup hub. This is like around 2013, 2014, and it's the startup hub of Europe, and everything's moving fast paced. There are meetups, tech meetups all over the place. Very similar to the vibe that you get here in San Francisco pre-pandemic. And yeah, and I was finally among people who I could talk to that knew about development and knew about programming, and that's when I finally realized how much knowledge gaps I have. Because I had only learned what my customers needed, but there was so much basic knowledge that I never acquired. I didn't study CS, so I didn't acquire it there either. But talking to these people and go to these meetups, I like find out all these things like, what on earth is HTTP? I mean, yes, I've seen it a bunch of times, but I actually never took the time to research how it works properly. And just the most basic things I was missing. And I realized I had to somehow learn all this, or else I would not be able to sustain myself as a web developer.
Now, this is interesting to me, Vanessa, because like when I hear you say that, I want to pull you back, because the reality was that you were solving problems for clients. You were learning how to do the things they needed to do. And knowing how HTTP worked wasn't one of them, right? You were getting things done. And so what I find interesting is you end up in a tech city with people who know internals and people who know things. But I feel like what's happening to you right now is that, oh, I think I need to know this, or I'm not at the same level as these people. But you were beyond the level of these people because you were already solving problems for the last, 10 years or something, right? I mean, were you feeling like you were way behind and you couldn't measure up? I'm really curious what was going on.
For sure, I realized I had so many knowledge gaps. Even I knew I could build websites and I could build e-commerce sites and I could do all these things, but at a very practical level. And I realized that, and whenever I would encounter issues, I would have to, of course, research it and find out. But because I was always solving problems, I never took the time to learn all the theory behind it and all the basics. That would have probably saved me a bunch of time whenever I was solving other problems. And also limited my ability to know what was out there and what I could actually build based on everything that was available.
So what happens once you form this conclusion in your head, right? Mm-hmm. And we can debate some of that, but you still have clients, you're still solving problems, you're still doing things. You form this conclusion. What's your next step? What do you decide to do next?
I decided I have to find a way to fill these knowledge gaps as soon as possible. So I knew I didn't want to go back to university and study CS. And instead I had heard about boot camps. So I researched on all over the internet for boot camps that would teach Python, because at that point I had already chosen Python as a programming language that I wanted to learn properly. And the only boot camp I could find was Hackbright in San Francisco. And I thought, well, I mean, if I'm really going to take some time off and just dedicate myself fully to learn this, then I might as well go to the mecca of software engineering. And yeah, I decided to apply to Hackbright.
Wow. Okay, hold on a second before we get there. Okay. Because I met you for the first time in San Francisco, I think just after you had moved from Berlin. So that's interesting. But you were involved already in some Go community stuff.
When you met me, that was 2017. Well, I'm still in 2015 when I first went to San Francisco. You met me the second time I moved to San Francisco.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so you go to San Francisco, you get accepted, you go to San Francisco. This is like a 3-month boot camp?
Yep. So I think I was the first international student to apply to Hackbright. I think until then they had never had an international student before. And yeah, and I miraculously got accepted. I remember their acceptance rate was extremely low. It was like 7% or 5% or something like that. And I love that it was an all women's boot camp, because I thought it was like, oh great, like it's really just going to be super supportive among other women, and it's just there's going to be like zero distractions with anything, and we're just going to be there, and I'm going to finally meet other women who code, because that was also something that I was severely lacking. I had already been very isolated growing up in Cologne, so I actually never experienced, like I never experienced feeling a minority while I lived in Cologne, because I felt like I didn't know anyone anyway who was a developer there. Oh, I forgot to mention, I did work at the IT department of my university as well. And there I was the only female IT person. That's the first time I actually encountered the bias against women, and that they they never listened when I explained things. But at that point, I was already so confident, because I had already worked with so many clients, that it didn't bother me at all. Like whenever I would be explaining things, like, no, you have to do it this way and this way, and I would notice that they're actually not listening when I'm saying. I would like literally just push their chair away, do it, and then they'd be like, I would actually get comments like, oh, I've never had a woman explain something to me. Like they would be that
Wow.
direct. And I was like, well, first time for everything.
Hmm.
But yeah, but then and in Berlin I experienced the same thing. Like there was this a ridiculous, I was, that's where I really felt like, okay, I'm actually am a minority. It's not just one woman among the 10 people in the IT department of the university. It's like one woman among hundreds of people in this meetup. There really is a huge minority of women. So I was really excited about Hackbright, and that it was all women, that I would meet much more women who were into coding. So yeah, 2015, I put everything I owned into storage and just packed my bags and went to Hackbright.
And was it everything that you were hoping it would be? Did it fill in the gaps that you needed
Yes.
filled in?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I realized how much I didn't know, and it was amazing. It was very intense, and it was great. It really set up the all the basics that I was missing, or at least also empowered me to learn more about what I was missing. And yeah, it was exactly what I needed. It changed my life in so many ways. It was an amazing experience.
What I'm what I'm struggling here with is the fact that you were giving your clients value. That you were productive. You're giving your clients value. Your clients are happy. They're paying you. You you're doing all these things, and you still felt like you were maybe not as qualified as you I think you were. And I'm happy that this school got you where you wanted to be. But after school, you're continuing to work with your clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to, so what is the tech now that you're giving your clients? Is it better? Do you feel it's better? Are you working more productively? Is this something you should have done 3 years earlier?
Because when I decided I wanted to learn Python, I decided I wanted to move away from web development, and I wanted to become a backend developer. So I knew I had to sunset my relationship with the clients. And what I did was I had already moved them all over to WordPress websites, because that was the easiest way to, include e-commerce into their website. And I forced them to learn how to edit their own websites. So I would record videos with them, teaching them, okay, this is how you upload a new image, this is how you add a new product, this is how you do this is you do that. And then I would give them outrageous prices for contacting me. Like, if you have a question, you have all these YouTube videos that you can access, and you can either email me and pay this amount of outrageous money, or you can check your video and do it yourself. So it's like complete financial suicide, really. But it was giving me the freedom to pursue my new goal, which was becoming a backend developer.
You're again ahead of the curve. Again, you're ahead of the curve. You found a strategy that would take care of your clients without burning bridges, recording everything, and then saying it's going to cost you. Like, these are really important strategies that can take companies years to figure out. And here you are. Like, it's amazing to me.
I finish Hackbright and I decide that I love San Francisco, that I don't want to go back to Berlin. I already drank the Kool-Aid. I was like, this place is amazing. I thought Berlin was awesome, but San Francisco is way more like on the pulse of time. I can, if I have issues, I remember for my Hackbright project, I was working on an app for a children's aid project, and I was including Twilio into the app because I wanted the ability to update profiles via SMS because there's no guarantee that you actually have internet in remote areas. That's also a complete own podcast for itself. But I was working with Twilio, with the Twilio API, and there was an issue. There was something that wasn't working, and I reread the docs like a million times, and there was just no way to find out why it wasn't working. And I decided I'm going to go over to Twilio, knock on their door, and tell them that something's wrong with their API, and they have to fix it with me. and I don't know how I got that contact, but I contacted someone who works at Twilio, and I told them I'm having these issues. I'm going to come over, and I need your help. And then they contacted me with some developer in Twilio, and that developer sat down with me for an hour to figure out what was going on. And I was right. There was like the documentation wasn't up to date. There was something that wasn't working the way it should. And I realized like this is a city where when you encounter an API problem, you can go to the actual company and they will help you. And I don't get that anywhere else in the world. So I want to stay here. This is where I'm going to grow exponentially. So I decided I was going to stay in San Francisco. However, of course, as a German citizen, that's not as easy. And I thought I could achieve that by just getting a job. And I applied for multiple jobs right after Hackbright to stay in San Francisco and get a job. And I actually got a job offer that introduced me to Golang. But the visa didn't work out, so I had to go back to Berlin.
Oh, so you must have felt a little crushed at that point. You're like,
Yes and no. So the reason why I wasn't that crushed is because, first of all, I was even able to get a job right after boot camp, which I thought was awesome. Like I was able to get a job in San Francisco, the most competitive city in the world, and it worked out. And that experience of getting a job offer, was what brought me to Go, because I applied for a role that was supposed to be front end, or at least that's what I thought it would be, because I sent them my resume. They knew that I had experience with JavaScript and Python and all these things, and they were a JavaScript and Go shop. So I never considered being interviewed for a Go position. However, when the day of the interview, I got a coding challenge that was for 5 hours. I had to build something, and it was completely hands off. It was like, okay, the timer goes off now, and in 5 hours you have to send us the working app. And it turns out that app wasn't Go. I knew nothing about Go. I didn't have Go installed. And the email said specifically, do not contact us. We will not respond to any questions. And I was like, damn. Okay.
well, this is your life. Like you were preparing for this your whole life, right? I mean, you've been doing this since you're 13. Yeah.
But yeah, there I was having 5 hours time to build my first Go app without even having Go installed on my laptop, not even like knowing anything about Go. So yeah, I immediately, of course, like went through all the tutorials I could find. Thank God for GoTour. GoTour totally saved me. Some tutorial about HTTP servers saved me. And I managed to actually build the requested web app with the majority of the features, not all of them, but the majority of the features. And I added like tiny security features that I thought were really important and they hadn't mentioned. And then when it came, and I was just floored that after 5 hours of not even knowing what Go was, I was able to build something that compiled and worked. And I fell in love with Go. That was like the moment I fell in love with Go.
But that's super. In all honesty, with everything that you've told me up to this point, you were really preparing for those moments. That's where you shined. You were kind of always in that situation, right? And you found your way out by providing practical solutions.
Oh yeah, it gave me all the basics, like knowing Python and knowing I knew how to build something like that in Python, but I had to like translate it all over into Go, and of course things work very differently there. So yeah, all the tutorials I could find online really saved me in that situation.
So when you get back to Berlin, I guess you're looking for a job again, right? You're not doing your
Yes,
client work anymore. You're done with that.
but I'm looking for a Go job. Like I was so determined. I was like, no, I love Go. I want to work in Go. So I specifically was only searching for Go jobs, and
And
I
is
got
that when you
lucky.
start to find the Go community or
Mm-hmm.
your
So I know there was while I was in San Francisco, I went to one of the Women Who Go events, and I loved it. Like it was such a great experience. I loved everyone involved, and Sarah was amazing. Like she was so motivating and really encouraging. And she was the one actually who proposed it, like, hey, if you're going back to Berlin, why don't you just start a group there? Like we could really use another chapter. So when I got to Berlin, I really wanted to learn Go, and I did go to the Go meetup, but whoa, women ratio there was very, very low.
not
It was
non-existent?
it was me and I think really just one, maybe two more women, and 200 men. Something. It was like the ratio was ridiculous. And I really liked, the camaraderie that I felt at Women Who Go in San Francisco, and I was like, I'd like that, and I want to have more women Go developers, because it's just, if we can mass produce women Go developers, and this whole minority majority issue is gonna dissolve by itself. It's really just giving them access to this kind of knowledge, and they'll thrive. So I started Women Who Go, and I remember I tweeted it. I just decided, okay, I'm just gonna make a Women Who Go meetup, and I'll just see how it goes. And I was so lucky that Julius Volz saw my tweet. I don't know how, but he saw my tweet, and he retweeted and commented about it and said he really liked this idea, and he became one of the first mentors in the Women Who Go Berlin group, and that's kind of how it started off.
You moved back to San Francisco at some point, maybe a year after that.
Yes, a year later. So I lived in Berlin for a year, almost a year, after coming back from San Francisco. And the reason why I ended up back in San Francisco is that 2015, when I went to do Hackbright, I met my now husband, Alan Hamlet, who's the maker of Wakatime. And it was really fate. It's like a really nice love story, in a sense that when I was in Berlin 2014 going to all these tech meetups, some random guy told me about this awesome website called Wakatime that tracks your programming activity, which is awesome when you're, learning how to code, or if, like in my situation, when you're working with different clients and you want to make sure that you're billing them correctly for all the different projects you're working on. And I started using Wakatime, and then fast forward to 2015, when I'm in San Francisco, heading to a Hackbright class, I see this guy with a Wakatime t-shirt walking in front of me. And of course, I couldn't resist, and I walk over to him and tap him on the shoulder and say, like, hey, you work for Wakatime? That's awesome. I love Wakatime. I use it every day. Da 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 da. And I gave him my card. I had a card, I had a business card, and I gave it to him. And I told him, hey, I have to run to class, but yeah, definitely contact me, and let's meet up, and maybe you can help me optimize my profile and blah blah. I don't know what I told him, but he actually emails me and meets up with me, and fails to mention that he's actually the maker. Like the one, it's a one-man show, so it's like he's actually the maker of Wakatime.
That's funny.
And yeah, we started dating, and he followed me all over, even to Berlin. We had only been dating for like 3 months or 4 months, and he
Wow.
followed me to Berlin. He gave up his life in San Francisco. We moved to Berlin. We lived there for a year, where I was working at Lovu as a Go developer. I actually managed to get
Nice.
a Go dev job. And in the summer, he proposed, 2016, and we got married pretty quickly, November 2016. And
Wow.
Yeah, and then we decided we wanted to go back to San Francisco.
And then you needed to find another job. Oh, but you're married at that point, so the visa issue isn't as big of a
So the
deal.
visa is resolved.
Gotcha.
I
But
got a marriage green card, yep.
so, but you're gonna work. So now you're back in San Francisco. You've got a couple of years of Go development experience under your belt, which is
Yep.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And then, is that when you find Sourcegraph, or you're doing something before that?
No. So it took quite a while for me to get the work permit. It took like 8 months or so. Um, so yeah, once I had my work permit, I had actually met the Sourcegraph team during GopherCon in Denver, 2017. And I didn't know about the product at that point. I didn't know what Sourcegraph did, but I just instantly connected with the team, and we went together to have some pizza, and I just got along with everyone. So I kind of fell in love with the team first, and then when I found out about the product, I was like, oh, why didn't I have this while I was learning to program? This would have made my life so much easier. And I was instantly, of course, convinced that this was the tool I wanted to work with, because it would make everyone's life much easier who wanted to program, and it could bring programming to so many people. So I applied, and yeah, I got the job, luckily.
But what I find interesting, because remember, we start this podcast with you being at Sourcegraph, and you're not a software developer there. You're doing kind of like developer relations, right? You're trying to help promote the product to developers, and yet you were an engineer from the time you're 13. And I find people have a really hard time letting go of the engineering, moving within their career. So what I'm super interested in is, was it a struggle for you to let go of the engineering side of that as a core developer on the product? And where's your head today on that decision?
So once I joined Sourcegraph, I went actually through multiple stages, in the sense that I was hired as a Go developer, but the need was higher in the front end side. So I actually switched very quickly to the front end team, and was working on the web app. And what led to me leaving engineering was a significant life change, which was I became a mother. And I struggled a lot in doing engineering and balancing motherhood with it, because some people don't know this, but some women suffer a lot from brain fog after giving birth. So postpartum, from breastfeeding and just the toll that it takes to build a human being inside of you, it leads to a significant. It can lead for some women to have a very much brain fog, which then limits their ability to focus well. Just a lot of the way my brain worked before changed, and it was making my code worse. I noticed that my code reviews got longer, that I was looking at things that I built, and I was like, why did I do it this way? This doesn't make sense. What was I thinking at that point? And I felt I was holding back my team in many ways, and I didn't want that. So I had to find ways to still, use my ability, use my experience that I had at Sourcecraft, because at that point I had already been in Sourcecraft I got hired pregnant, but I had very good 6 months of production before I gave birth, so I was able to leave a certain amount of legacy during that time. And then when I came back from maternity leave is when I realized that I was starting to struggle. But I was still an engineer until 2019, September 2019, is when I then started switching over to more marketing roles that definitely worked more with the new abilities I had acquired through motherhood, and also didn't require this like sharp focus that I needed for coding, that I just couldn't sustain with the brain fog.
But I think that your long history of engineering and solving problems, being in the dark in many cases and finding solution, is a huge asset to Sourcegraph in the position you have now.
I hope so.
Because you're interacting with user. I think it is. I think you get to kind of see where developers you have empathy for developers because you've been in that chair
Yeah.
and you know what they're struggling with, and you know you wish what you had at the time and what they don't, and then you're able to go back to engineering and translate that. I think you have this amazing kind of space and experience there that companies, I know many companies that are, they're dying to have somebody like you in the position that you're in. It's such a critical role to have someone like you be able to do that. It really is. I can see companies that are struggling when they don't have it. Just their UI, their UX, their ability to interact with others just comes
Yeah,
down,
I
right?
do feel that once I switched over to the marketing team, we had been searching, like wanting to grow the marketing team for a while, but I mean, Sourcegraph was in a position where we were very focused on building this amazing product and just wanted to make sure that we had it all prepared for market fit and that we were really fulfilling developers' values and developers' needs. And once we got to that point and started seeing an increase on demand and seeing an increase on adoption, that's when we kind of felt more confident. Okay, now we can start doing more marketing and trying to reach as many people as possible, and now also reach out to a community that can grow and can just benefit from what Sourcegraph has to offer. And yes, I do feel like now working with more experienced marketing people, I do feel like they ask me questions like, is this, how would this be perceived by a developer? Is this really, like, because normal traditional marketing strategies aren't necessarily fruitful among developers. So we have to definitely consider the developer mindset, what they're searching for, and they tend to want really a certain, they want honesty, and they want to know that we're not taking advantage of them, but we're actually helping them with their needs, and that is our main goal. And luckily that aligns with Sourcegraph's mission. Like, our main goal, and we have that on our handbook, is to bring coding to as many people as possible. And that also makes it very easy for me to work in the marketing team, because that has always been my goal as well. I was involved in Women Who Go for a Reason. I was also actually involved in Pie Ladies in Berlin. And I want that as well. My experience with coding is something I want to spread to as many people as possible.
So are you enjoying this new role now and what you're able to do in
Yep.
this role as opposed to just being an engineer?
I do miss engineering, don't get me wrong, but I also know it just doesn't work with my current lifestyle. I'm a mother of two little beautiful children now, and sleep deprivation and and just the toll it takes to build little humans is something that doesn't align well and doesn't work well with engineering, at least for me. I know some amazing women who are able to still endure it all and somehow like are super people, but I was struggling with it, and I want to go back to engineering once I can recover from this, and I feel I can focus fully again in the way I could. And until then, I love working with community. That's something I've always loved to do on the side. So it just felt natural. Also within Sourcecraft, like it was kind of a no-brainer that I would then shift over to a more community-focused position.
So as we're here near the end of this amazing story, um, I get the sense that you were kind of brought up to be this entrepreneur from the very beginning, from your parents. You were taking advantage of opportunities. You were out there hustling. You were learning the things you needed to do to allow the people that were asking you for help to be successful. You had this amazing kind of upbringing, some of it out of just the love of design and creativity, some of it maybe out of necessity. Um, I find it super interesting that when you get to Berlin and you start meeting people who are more technical than you start to see what you don't know and maybe how some of that could have helped you and your clients. And your initial thing is, okay, I'm gonna learn this stuff because it's gonna make me better. And you just every step of the way you just go, okay, no, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make it happen, and you make it happen. And this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna make it happen. Some of it you've done on your own. Some of it you did with the help of others. So as I'm summing all this up, and now you're in this great place with this great company. You met the great guy. You got a beautiful family. Um, I have to imagine that there are other people like kind of in this same situation, and I want to say to them, listen to Vanesa's story, because she found passion in all of these things, and she never gave up, and she kept moving forward and made positive choices, and positive things happened. So, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this kind of part of the story that I just heard? Is there anything they're missing that maybe you want to add?
I mean, yeah, I'm definitely a determined person, but I also acknowledge that I was very lucky in so many ways. Like the fact that I was at in my older years that I was able to live in Germany, where being a student is basically subsidized by the government, so it makes it easier to not have to keep odd jobs but focus on your studies, and then also run a web development side gig, and the fact that I got to go to Berlin, that offers a variety of free meetups that can where you can acquire so much knowledge. Yeah, it was just a combination of determination and also just the ability to access all this information. That's something that I know not everyone has access to, but I'm sure we're all working towards making it easier.
But I think some of it also is fighting the fears, right? Like that might have been an uncomfortable situation, maybe, but you fought it because at the end of the day that was the best thing for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everyone starts off as a newbie, right? And then the interesting thing about engineering is that you're always a newbie because it never stops. It's always ongoing, and you just have to jump into the river and swim as strong as you can, and just get used to it, and just try to learn as many swim techniques as you can.
Brilliant. Okay, Vanesa, let everybody know here at the end, and we'll put in the show notes how they can reach out to you if they have questions about a little, about your story, and if they have questions about themselves, and because I think what's nice here is there are going to be people who relate to your story and where they are today, and it'd be nice to talk to you maybe a bit about it. So how can
Yeah.
people kind of reach you on the internets?
They can definitely find me on Twitter under Vanesa Codes. And yes, Vanessa is written with one S, Vanesa Codes. My parents really wanted to name me in the Spanish way, so that's how it is. So yeah, I think Twitter is the best way to reach me.
Okay, brilliant. So there you are, Twitter. All right. Thank you for spending what ended up being an hour and a half of your time with us today. I really appreciate you telling your story. It's an amazing story.
Thank
And I
you for
got
having
to,
me here. This was fun.
yeah,
It's been a while since I really went through my entire life that way.
yeah, but super interesting. And now even your story kind of fills in some gaps for me a little bit on when we met and all that. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. This is Bill Kennedy with the Ardan Labs podcast saying thank you for listening and hope to see you next time.